Since you got here late, at least make yourself useful. Take the coffee out to the guests." Diane Whitfield pushed a silver tray into Claire's hands before her daughter-in-law could even take off her coat. The housewarming party filled every room of the newly renovated estate in Brentwood Hills, just outside Nashville. White orchids lined the hallways. A string quartet played near the veranda. Servers moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. And still, out of everyone in that house, Diane had chosen Claire to serve. Claire stood frozen for a moment. She was 34 years old. She had come straight from a job site fighting traffic across the city to make it in time for the toast. She had believed she would be sitting beside her husband Mark just as they'd planned. Instead, she was handed a tray and a beige apron that Diane had pulled from a kitchen drawer. "The waitstaff is busy," Diane added as if that explained anything. "And you know this house, don't you?" Claire looked around the room. At least 6 uniformed staff stood near the bar waiting for instructions. There was no shortage of hands to carry coffee. What was missing was someone Diane could place beneath everyone else without having to pay them a wage. "I can help," after the toast, Claire said. "Mark said we'd talk about the project together tonight." Diane smiled, a practiced, delicate smile. "This is my son's project. You made a few sketches. Let's not confuse collaboration with authorship." The word stung because Claire had designed nearly the entire layout of that house. She had reworked the flow of every room, the lighting, the ventilation, the accessibility. She'd spent nights fixing construction errors that could have delayed the whole build. She never charged a dime because Mark had told her the renovation would finally bring his mother and his wife closer together. In the main hall, a brass plaque listed the names behind the renovation. Mark Whitfield, visionary and lead designer. Claire's name appeared nowhere. Even the architecture firm that had only finalized the drawings got a line of thanks. She did not. Mark was across the room talking to 2 businessmen near the staircase. He glanced at his wife holding the tray, then looked away. He raised his glass and kept smiling. Claire felt the first crack open inside her. It wasn't only Diane putting her in this position. Her husband was letting it happen because his wife's humiliation protected his own image. "Go on," Diane ordered. "The coffee's getting cold." Claire crossed the room. A few guests thanked her without recognizing the architect who had designed the very space around them. One woman handed her an empty glass, mistaking her for staff. Another asked for a refill. Claire answered politely. She wasn't going to give Diane the satisfaction of calling her hysterical in front of the family, but her calm wasn't submission. She was watching. In the center of the room stood a scale model of the estate, complete with the new pool, the expanded veranda, the sunroom. Every detail had come from her drawings. Mark was explaining to the guests how he alone had transformed a rundown old property into a modern residence. Diane stood beside him, repeating over and over that her son had rebuilt the family's legacy through hard work and courage. "My Mark always knew how to build something out of nothing," she declared. "Everything you see here came from his ability." A cousin asked if Claire had also worked on the renovation. Diane let out a small laugh. "Claire's good with spreadsheets and paperwork. It takes a man to turn a project into an actual legacy." Mark heard it. He didn't correct her. Claire set the tray down on a table before her hands could start shaking. Through all their years of marriage, she had quietly covered the gap between her financial stability and her husband's struggles. When Mark's company lost contracts, she was the one who kept the household running. When Diane needed the roof repaired, Claire paid for the inspection. She had never once asked for public credit. Tonight, though, the absence of gratitude came wrapped in something stranger. The renovation had cost far more than the original budget. Mark said he'd secured a business line of credit, but he avoided showing her the paperwork. Whenever Claire asked, he told her his mother had offered up the house itself as collateral. She had believed him because the house belonged to Diane. A young server approached and said the smaller dining room was out of napkins. Diane heard it and called Claire over again. "Go to the office. There are boxes in the lower cabinet. Bring 2. Why are you just standing there doing nothing?" Claire almost said she'd spent months doing everything Instead, she walked down the hall. She knew any argument right now would only be used to shift attention away from Mark's behavior. First, she needed to understand why her husband had seemed so nervous since the moment she walked in. Diane's office sat at the back of the house, newly decorated with pale bookshelves and a heavy wooden desk. Claire opened the lower cabinet and found the napkins. As she stood, she noticed a blue folder half hidden beneath the flower arrangement on the desk. The logo of her own condo building was printed on one of the pages sticking out. Claire stepped closer. That condo, the one on Riverside Green, had been bought with the inheritance her father left her before she and Mark were even married. It wasn't part of Mark's assets, and Diane had no reason at all to be holding documents about that property. She pulled the folder out a few inches. A copy of the deed, the property tax bill, a recent appraisal. The estimated value was highlighted in yellow, $1.2 million. Claire's heart started pounding. "What are you doing in here?" Diane's voice came from the doorway. Claire turned. "Why do you have a copy of the deed to my condo?" Diane moved quickly and shut the folder. "Those are Mark's documents. The property isn't his. Everything in a marriage belongs to both people." "Not legally, and you know that." Diane pressed her lips together. For 1 second, the gracious hostess mask slipped. "You always have to turn everything into a property dispute. I'm asking why my paperwork is hidden in your office. It's not hidden. It was used for a financial review." "What review?" Diane set the flower arrangement back over the folder. "Ask your husband later. There are guests waiting." Claire didn't move. "This has something to do with the loan for the renovation, doesn't it, Diane?" Grabbed the boxes of napkins and pushed one against Claire's chest. "Don't ruin the night with technical questions. Mark handled everything. With my condo." Diane opened the door. "You should be proud to help your family." The answer confirmed exactly what Claire had been afraid to put into words. Diane hadn't said how the documents were used, but it was clear they weren't sitting in that office by accident. Claire reached for her phone. Before she could take a photo of the folder, Diane called a staff member over and had the material carried off to the guest room. "This is confidential," Diane said, "and it isn't yours to look through." Claire answered, "My deed belongs to me. The paper might have your name on it, but my son is the one who builds wealth in this family." Claire left the office without the napkins. In the hallway, her breathing went shallow. She remembered the one time she had ever let Mark handle anything related to that condo. 3 years earlier, a pipe had burst in the kitchen. Since she'd be traveling for work, she signed a limited power of attorney so Mark could deal with the insurance company and the building's management. The document had an expiration date. It did not allow loans. It did not allow him to put the property up as collateral, let alone mortgage it. At the time, Mark had praised her for trusting him. He said marriage meant sharing responsibilities. She never imagined a copy of that document would still be sitting in a drawer somewhere long after the problem had been resolved. Her phone buzzed, a notification from the county property records office. Claire almost ignored it, thinking it was some routine account update. When she opened it, she saw the parcel number for her condo. The same number she'd just seen in the blue folder. Pending request for owner confirmation regarding a property lien. There was also the name of a bank and a reference to a credit line tied to a residential renovation. The total amount was over $1.8 million. Her condo appeared as supplemental collateral. None of it had ever been presented to her. Out in the main hall, the guests started clapping. Mark stepped up onto the staircase landing and asked for everyone's attention for a toast. Claire stayed in the hallway holding her phone. The music stopped. "This house represents a new beginning for the Whitfield family," he announced. "My mother preserved this legacy for decades. I had the honor of giving it back the grandeur it always deserved." Diane dabbed at a carefully timed tear. "My son did all of this," she said. "I never had to ask anyone outside the family for help." Claire closed her eyes for a second. That last phrase landed hard. Diane used it to erase her contribution completely, and yet the documents proved that the property of the woman being treated like an outsider was now tied to this very house. Mark went on thanking vendors, friends, and financial partners. He never once mentioned his wife. When he raised his glass, everyone else raised theirs too. Claire went back to the kitchen. She didn't want to confront him without proof. If she revealed what she knew now, Diane could hide the documents. Mark could change his story, delete messages, or claim it was all some bank error. She needed to stay calm. She opened the full notification and saved copies. She photographed the case number, the bank's name, the amount, and the parcel number. Then she emailed everything to her work address and to a protected folder. The cook, Miss Lucy, noticed her face. "Are you all right, honey?" Claire said she was fine, but the older woman didn't believe her. Miss Lucy had worked for Diane for 15 years. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "I saw Mr. Mark bring in a blue folder a few weeks back. His mama said once it got signed, the house would be safe. Signed what, I don't know. But I heard Miss Diane say you'd come around eventually because you'd never let your husband lose everything." Claire felt a chill run through her hands. They said my name. They did. Before she could ask more, Diane walked into the kitchen. "Claire, the guests are still waiting on that coffee." Miss Lucy stepped away. Diane set another tray in front of her daughter-in-law. "You can talk to Mark later. Don't make a scene right now." Claire looked down at the cups. Diane believed she still controlled the clock in this house, and Claire's silence along with it. She thought keeping her busy until the party ended would be enough. Maybe the plan was to bring out some paper afterward once the work was done and the money already spent, when a refusal would be much harder to give. "Does someone need me to sign something tonight?" Claire asked. Diane hesitated just for a second. "Mark has some insurance paperwork." "Insurance on what property? I don't know the details. He'll explain." The lie was thin. Diane knew exactly what was in that folder. Claire picked up the tray. This time, not because she was obeying, but because she wanted to get back out there and watch her husband. As she crossed the room, she saw Mark talking to a man in a gray suit, carrying a folder with a bank's logo on it. The stranger handed him an envelope and pointed to a signature line. Mark noticed his wife and quickly tucked the paper away. "There you are," he said, trying to smile. "My mom said you were helping out. Who is this?" "A manager who handled the credit line." "Why is he here?" "He came to help us celebrate." The man extended his hand. "Pleasure, Mrs. Whitfield. We were hoping to finally meet you in person." Mark cut in. "We don't need to talk business right now." The manager looked confused, but mentioned that owner confirmation had been scheduled for tonight. The color drained from Mark's face. Claire set the tray down on a table, confirmation of what Mark took her arm and tried to steer her away. "It's just an insurance formality." She pulled her arm back. "Insurance or a property lien?" Diane appeared immediately. "Not in front of the guests." Claire didn't raise her voice. "My condo is showing up in a $1.8 million loan. I want to know why." The bank manager looked at Mark. "She hasn't received the paperwork yet." Mark answered fast. "We talked about this at home." "We did not," Claire said. A few nearby guests stopped talking. Diane tried to smile and announced there was a small administrative misunderstanding. She asked the band to start playing again, then whispered to her daughter-in-law, "Just sign it. Mark will explain later." Claire felt her last bit of hope disappear. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a mistake. Diane knew her confirmation was still missing, and she'd planned to get it right in the middle of a crowded party once the house was already finished. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the property office. "Confirmation from owner not received. The lien cannot be finalized." Claire looked at Mark. The man who had promised to protect the condo her father left her now stood there waiting for her to sign, without reading, in front of the very family that had just spent the evening denying she'd contributed anything at all. Diane pushed the pen toward her again. "Don't be ungrateful. This house will be yours too one day." Claire didn't touch the document. "My condo is already mine today." She pocketed her phone, stepped back from the table and walked out onto the veranda. Behind her, the party tried to keep going, but the laughter already sounded uneasy. Mark called her name twice. She didn't turn around. She pulled up the contact for Helen Marsh, the attorney, who handled contracts for her design firm. She sent the photos, the case number, and the partial image of the power of attorney she'd managed to capture before Diane moved the folder. Then she typed, "I need to know if someone can use this power of attorney to offer my condo as collateral." The reply came less than a minute later. "Do not sign anything. Call me right now." Claire put the phone to her ear. While she waited for Helen to pick up, she watched through the glass door as Diane and Mark raised their glasses again in front of the glowing house. They were celebrating a fresh start for the family. But all that luxury around them depended on a signature Claire had never given. And for the first time that night, she understood she hadn't been invited to take a seat at the table. She'd been kept close only so her hand could eventually finish the document hidden inside that blue folder. "Don't sign anything until you've shown me every single page," Helen said the moment she picked up. Claire stayed on the veranda, her back to the glowing party inside. On the other end of the line, the attorney told her to breathe and start from the beginning. Claire explained about the blue folder, the copy of the deed, the recent appraisal, the message from the property office. Helen listened without interrupting. When she heard that Mark sounded shaky, she asked for a full photo of whatever document the bank had presented. "I can't get to it right now," Claire said. Diane took the folder out of the office. "Then don't confront anyone yet. Just protect what you already have." Claire closed her eyes. The advice made sense, but it demanded a kind of calm that was getting harder to hold on to by the minute. Inside, the guests were still toasting. The band had started playing again like nothing had happened. Mark moved between tables trying to get his smile back. Diane watched her daughter-in-law through the glass door with the impatience of someone waiting for a prop to return to its mark. Helen kept going. "Do you remember exactly what you authorized in that power of attorney?" Claire remembered perfectly 3 years earlier. An old pipe had burst in the middle of the night and flooded the kitchen of the Riverside Green condo. She'd been about to leave for a work trip to Charlotte to oversee a hospital project. Mark had offered to deal with the insurance company, the building management, the inspection reports. The marriage still felt solid back then. Signing a limited power of attorney seemed like a natural thing between two people building a life together. On the morning of her flight, Claire had read the document at the kitchen table. It authorized Mark to submit reports, attend the inspection, speak with the insurance company, and receive communications from the building. The term was 90 days. Not one line mentioned a bank, a loan, a lien, or a mortgage. Mark had kissed her forehead after she signed it. "Thank you for trusting me." Back then, the words had warmed her heart. Now they felt like a key that had been used to unlock something that was never his to open. Claire went back inside so she wouldn't raise suspicion. Diane came over right away. "You finished your call?" "It was work." "Then come with me. Mark needs you to sign a form." "What form? I already told you. Insurance update." Claire followed her mother-in-law into a smaller room, used as a library. Mark was there with the bank manager. On a side table sat a white envelope and a metal pen. The blue folder wasn't in sight. The manager stood. "Mrs. Whitfield, we can finish the confirmation in just a few minutes." Mark cut in. "She hasn't had time to review it. Maybe we should do this later." Diane looked at her son, irritated. "Not later. The bank needs to release the rest tomorrow." The sentence slipped out before she could stop it. Claire looked straight at Mark. The rest of what she said, something about vendors still waiting on payment, the credit line had been structured in stages, this signature would only confirm information already submitted. Information about my condo. "It's a temporary supplemental guarantee," Mark admitted. "The house is still the primary collateral." Claire felt like the air in the room had thinned out. "When I agreed to help, we talked about helping your mother. We talked about a project, not about putting my property at risk." Diane spoke up. "Nobody's putting anything at risk. This house is worth so much more after the renovation." The bank manager stayed out of the argument, gathering some papers, explaining that the institution required express confirmation from the owner before final recording. According to the paperwork received, there was a prior power of attorney and a statement of consent. "I never gave any statement of consent," Claire said. Mark ran a hand through his hair. "Claire, please, let's talk about this without making it a bigger problem." "The problem was already made without me. Diane pushed the document toward her daughter-in-law. "Read it and sign. The guests are waiting for the final toast." Claire picked up the pages but not the pen. The title was partly covered by a bank sticker. She lifted the page and read, "Ratification of property lien and owner's consent." There was no mention of insurance anywhere. The document stated that Claire acknowledged the voluntary inclusion of her condo as supplemental collateral and authorized the recording of the transaction. It also confirmed she understood the risk of foreclosure in the event of default. Claire felt her fingers go cold. "This is not an insurance update." Mark lowered his voice. "It's just formalizing what's already been done. What's already been done without my authorization," Diane answered. "Don't be dramatic. Your condo won't be touched." "Then why does the bank need it?" Diane didn't respond. The manager explained that the appraisal on the house alone didn't cover the full amount requested. The bank had agreed to release the first portion based on Diane's property and Mark's company's projected revenue. For the remaining balance, additional collateral was required. Claire asked how much hadn't been released yet. The man checked the paperwork. Roughly 40% of the total. Mark tried to downplay it. "Once the next contracts come through, we'll pay most of it off quickly." "What contracts?" He named 2 jobs still in negotiation. Neither one was signed. Claire set the pages back down. "I'm not signing anything right now." Diane shut the library door. "You want to embarrass us in front of everyone. I want to understand why you used my paperwork without telling me. Mark is your husband, not the owner of my condo." Diane took a deep breath, the way someone speaks to an ungrateful child. "A wife's property should serve her husband's future." Claire said, "My father didn't leave me that condo to finance a lie." The mention of her father shifted something in her. For months after his death, Claire used to walk into that empty condo just to feel like his voice still lived somewhere in it. That apartment wasn't just an investment. It was proof of decades of work by a man who taught her never to sign anything she didn't fully understand. Mark knew that, and he had still treated that inheritance like some quiet reserve available whenever the Whitfield family needed it. The manager stepped out to take a call. Once he left, Mark moved closer to his wife. "When was I supposed to tell you? After the renovation stabilized? After the money was already spent? I knew you'd panic before you understood." Claire looked at him. "You didn't want me to understand. You wanted me to find out once it was too late to say no." Diane cut in. "Mark did all of this for this family?" "What family? The one that has me serving coffee, or the one using my condo?" Diane opened the door again. "I'm not going to argue while there are important people in my house." "Then stop trying to close out your loan during a party." Claire left the library carrying only her phone. She hadn't touched the folder or the document. She needed a copy, but she knew any sudden move would send Diane into hiding everything mode. In the hallway, she ran into Miss Lucy carrying an empty tray. The cook glanced around before speaking. "The blue folder's up in the guest room, in the dresser drawer." Miss Diane had it put away. Claire thanked her and headed upstairs unhurried. The bedroom was on the upper floor, far from the party. She waited until the hallway was empty, then opened the dresser. The blue folder sat under a folded throw blanket. This time she photographed every single page. The deed, the property tax records, the appraisal, the old power of attorney, copies of her personal documents, and then a consent form dated 2 months earlier. Her signature was at the bottom of the page. She recognized it instantly. It was the same digitized signature used on the insurance form during the flooding incident. It hadn't been made on this document. The size of the slant, even a small flaw in the final letter, all identical. Claire photographed everything and sent it to Helen. Then she looked over the power of attorney. The 90-day term had expired more than 2 years ago. At the top of one page, someone had written by hand, "Sufficient authority for property representation." That phrase wasn't part of the original text. Claire heard footsteps and closed the drawer. Diane appeared in the doorway. "I told you not to touch those documents. There's a signature of mine on a form I've never seen." Diane showed no surprise. "Mark handled that. He copied my signature. Don't talk like your husband is some criminal." How else should I describe someone who uses my signature without permission? Diane stepped into the room and shut the door. Call him a desperate man trying to save his own mother's legacy. Claire felt the confirmation land harder than any suspicion had. You knew. I knew you'd never help if we asked first, so you decided for me. We decided for the family. Claire held the phone against her chest. You call it family when you need something of mine? In front of the guests, I'm just the woman who serves coffee. Diane's face hardened. You've always been too sensitive. Nobody forced you to carry that tray. You put the tray in my hands, and now you're using it to call me a victim. Claire opened the door. I don't need to play any part. The documents speak for themselves. Diane grabbed her arm. If you block this loan, the vendors won't get paid. Mark will lose contracts. This house could be seized. Everyone will know you destroyed this family out of pride. Claire pulled her arm free. I'm not the one who put this house at risk. She went back downstairs. The party was still going, but the mood had shifted. A few vendors were talking to Mark near the staircase. A middle-aged man Claire recognized as the accountant for Mark's company approached her. Mrs. Whitfield, glad I ran into you. I've been worried about the paperwork on the supplemental property. Mark appeared almost instantly. Arnold, not now. The accountant realized his mistake. Sorry, I figured she already knew. Claire asked, Since when has my condo been part of this deal? Arnold looked at Mark. Since the credit restructuring, about 2 months ago. And who provided the documents? The accountant hesitated. They came from Mr. Whitfield's office. Mark pulled him aside. Go check on the payments. Claire caught the word. What payments? Arnold answered before he was cut off. The final construction installment, the furniture, the vendors for tonight's event. It all depends on the final release. Diane stepped in trying to smile at nearby guests. We're not discussing finances right now. Claire looked around. Tables, flowers, lights, furniture, the pool, the music. The whole party seems to be running on money that didn't exist, yet money that depended on her. Mark asked his wife to come out to the garden with him. You need to calm down. I need you to answer one question. Did you send my signature? He went quiet. Mark, I used a copy that was already on file. The late honesty hurt more than a denial would have. You knew you didn't have authorization. You knew you'd need to get it ratified later, and you presented it as if I'd already agreed. The bank hasn't finalized anything yet, because it still needs me. Mark reached for her hand. Sign it today. Tomorrow we'll talk this through calmly. If you block this now, my company runs out of cash. Claire stepped back. You put your company, your mother's house, and my condo into a deal I didn't even know about, and now you want me to sign to protect you from the consequences? I want you to protect what we built. I didn't build this lie. Her phone buzzed. Helen was asking her to call immediately. Claire walked to the side garden and picked up. The attorney spoke faster than before. I reviewed the photos. The power of attorney expired and it never granted authority for a loan, a mortgage, or any kind of lien. The consent form uses a digitized signature. Do you recognize this document? Never seen it. Then don't sign anything. Not tonight, not later. Before we file the formal dispute, Claire, listen carefully. That power of attorney never allowed your condo to be used as collateral. Not once. The sentence closed off any remaining doubt. This wasn't a different interpretation. This wasn't red tape. This was a signature used far beyond what she had ever authorized. Claire gripped the phone. What do we do now? First, we preserve everything. Then we notify the bank and the county to suspend any action pending an audit. But I need you to decide. Claire looked toward the blue folder now in Diane's hands. Her mother-in-law still believed she could hide that paper under flowers, trays, and speeches about family. She couldn't. Suspend it, Claire said, before they turn a forgery into a real obligation. At that exact moment, Mark opened the garden door and walked toward her with the document and the pen. He still believed all that was missing was a signature. He didn't know Claire had just chosen to protect the one piece of her father's memory she still carried. even if that decision brought down every appearance of victory built inside that house. "If you love me," sign before it's too late. Mark held the pen out to Claire in the side garden. Behind him, the windows reflected the party, the freshly cleaned chandeliers, the guests who still believed they were celebrating a success story. In his other hand was the document capable of turning an unfinished fraud into a real binding obligation. Claire didn't take the pen. Too late for who? Mark glanced around before answering. For my company, for my mother, for the vendors who still need to get paid, and for my condo. The condo isn't in danger if everything goes according to plan. Claire felt a quiet sadness settle over her. He hadn't promised the property was safe. He'd only said it would be safe if his plans worked out. Her father's legacy had been staked on projections, on unsigned contracts, on a trust that Mark had already broken. Helen was still on the line. The attorney had caught part of the conversation. Claire asked him to hand over the document for review. Don't sign, and don't let them pull pages or swap anything out. Mark heard the voice on the phone. You called a lawyer in the middle of the party? I called one the moment I found my signature on a document I never signed. Helen's going to turn this into a criminal case. You're the one who turned my signature into something else. He stepped back. For a second, guilt crossed his face. Then came the fear. Don't use that word in front of my mother. What word? Signature. Fraud. Lien. I didn't forge anything. I used a copy that was already authorized. Claire answered calmly. Authorized for the insurance company, not for a loan. Mark tried to explain that the bank knew ratification would still be needed. According to him, the first document had only opened the file for review. The final signature would happen that night. Nothing would be finalized until Claire agreed. Then why does the form say I already agreed 2 months ago? He didn't answer. Diane appeared at the garden door. The guests are asking about you two. Claire looked at her mother-in-law. Tell them we're discussing the fact that my signature was copied. Diane shut the door behind her. Don't talk like that. Mark didn't steal anything. He offered up my condo without asking me. The house will still be yours. Not if the loan defaults. Diane sighed, exasperated. You always assume the worst. That's exactly why we didn't tell you sooner. We knew you'd ask questions until the opportunity slipped away. The opportunity to use my assets. The opportunity to save this house. Claire gestured toward the lights, the flowers, the furniture. You didn't save this house. You spent money you didn't have and figured you'd pressure me afterward. Mark asked them both to stop. The bank manager would be back any minute. If Claire refused now, the institution might reevaluate the entire deal. That's exactly what needs to happen, she said. Diane went pale. You can't do this. I can stop my property from being used without authorization. The vendors are here. Our relatives are here. You want everyone to know you tried to destroy your own family's house. Claire held the phone steady. When you needed my signature, I was part of the family. Now that it's time to say thank you, you handed me a coffee tray. Diane opened her mouth, but no answer came right away. Helen asked Claire to step outside the house for a few minutes. They needed to file the dispute with biometric verification and send a simultaneous notice to the bank and the county office. Claire walked to her car parked on the street. Mark followed. Please don't do anything right now. You had 2 months to tell me. I wanted to wait for the loan approval. I wanted to wait until the money was spent. The renovation raised the value of my mother's house. Once we sell the back lot, we'll pay off a chunk of it. Claire stopped by the car door. Is there even a buyer? No. Is there a signed offer? No. So you put my condo up as collateral for a debt you're planning to cover with a sale that hasn't even started. Mark looked smaller outside the glow of the party. My company has contracts lined up too. Lined up doesn't pay installments. He grabbed her arm. I was trying to prove I could pull this off. She pulled her hand away. Prove it to who? Mark looked back at the house. The answer was right there. Diane had spent his whole life telling him he needed to restore the family name. When the roof started leaking and the walls stained with water damage, she treated the house's decline as his personal shame. He'd promised to fix everything, even without the capital to do it. My mother believed in me, he said, eyes down. Claire got into the car and locked the doors. Helen sent a secure link for verification. First, Claire confirmed the parcel number. Then she stated that she had never authorized the use of the property as collateral. She attached photos of the power of attorney, the consent form, and the message from the property office. The platform asked her to record a video statement. Claire took a breath and spoke. I, Claire Bennett Whitfield, owner of the property listed in this filing, hereby contest any consent presented under my name. The power of attorney used was limited to insurance and building management matters, has since expired and never granted authority for a loan or property lien. When she finished, she felt the weight of the decision settle in. There was no shouting, no revenge, just her voice, her face, and a truth now on record. Helen forwarded the dispute to the bank. Now we need the official copy of the recorded power of attorney and whatever document the bank actually received. How long will that take? The county can confirm the power of attorney today. The bank will have to suspend any next step pending review. Mark knocked on the window. Claire lowered it a few inches. Come out. We can work through this like husband and wife. You didn't treat me like a wife when you decided for me. We can still fix this. Fixing it doesn't mean making me sign. He said refusing could stop payments to workers. Claire asked which amounts corresponded to actual completed work and which were luxury expenses. Mark couldn't answer precisely. Helen chimed in over speakerphone. The bank can separate out legitimate obligations. Mrs. Whitfield doesn't need to guarantee the entire operation just to protect the vendors. Mark grew angry. You're listening to a lawyer who doesn't even know our family. Claire answered. My family should have been the first ones to protect my signature. The county sent the digital certificate 15 minutes later. The original power of attorney had 4 pages. The version used at the bank had 5. The extra page contained a generic statement about property representation. Helen compared the files. This 5th page isn't part of the recorded instrument. Claire's stomach dropped. It was added. Yes, and the note about property authority doesn't appear in the official version either. Mark heard it. I didn't add any page. Who prepared the file? Helen asked. A loan consultant. Who gave him the documents? Mark went silent. Diane came out of the house and walked to the car. Come back inside. The manager is waiting. Claire opened the door and held up the certificate. This page doesn't exist in the original power of attorney. Diane barely glanced at it. That's banking language. I don't understand that stuff. You understood enough to hide the folder and try to stop me from photographing it. Diane said she was only following Mark's instructions. He denied it immediately. You're the one who found the old power of attorney. Diane's expression shifted. Because you said you needed documents. I asked for the deed to this house, not your daughter-in-law's condo. Claire watched them both. The alliance between mother and son was starting to crack now that responsibility stopped being abstract. Who sent my signature? She asked. Mark answered. I did. I sent the old file to the consultant knowing it would be used in the form. He said it would speed up the review. And the added page, I didn't know about that. Diane crossed her arms. The consultant assured us it was standard procedure. Claire realized the lie didn't have just one author. Diane had found the documents. Mark had sent the signature. A middleman had turned it into a bank file. Each of them had accepted a small violation because they believed Claire would eventually give in. Helen asked for the consultant's name. Mark refused at first. The attorney explained the bank would get the information regardless, and stalling would only make things worse for him. He handed over a business card. The man's name was Alan Torres, a loan broker. Helen noted it down. From now on, nobody contact him without keeping a record of the conversation. Diane grabbed her son's arm. Don't hand over anything else. Claire's building a case. Claire answered, I don't need to build anything. You two already built the documents. The bank manager appeared at the front entrance. His name was Robert Sanders. He was carrying the envelope, but his posture had changed. His phone had picked up an alert from the legal department. Mrs. Whitfield, the bank just received a formal dispute. I'm the one who sent it. Robert opened his folder. In that case, we can't proceed with tonight's confirmation. Diane tried to step in. This is just a family disagreement. She'll sign once she calms down. The dispute involves a possible discrepancy in the documentation, the manager replied. We have to suspend the process pending review. Mark asked if the funds would still release the next day. I can't guarantee that. Payments are already scheduled. Robert explained that the portion tied to the supplement Al guaranteed depended on verification. The bank would review what had already been approved, what was conditional, and whether the deal still worked using only the house as collateral. How long? Diane asked. We don't know yet. Diane looked at Claire as though she'd caused all of this in that instant. Happy now? No. And it was true. Claire felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness at being forced to choose between protecting her father's condo and preserving the appearance of a family that had betrayed her. The three of them walked back inside. Robert stayed near the entrance taking calls. The party carried on, but a few vendors had already picked up on the tension. Arnold, the accountant, quietly pulled Claire aside. I need to show you something. He led her down a service hallway. On his phone was a thread of messages between Mark and Diane. Diane had written, Claire will sign once she sees the finished house. She'll never let vendors go unpaid. Mark had replied, I just need the bank to release the first part. After that, there's no way she can back out without hurting everyone else. Claire felt her eyes sting. Mark hadn't just acted out of desperation. He had planned to turn her sense of responsibility into a trap. Spend the money first, surround his wife with workers and obligations, then claim a refusal would ruin lives. Why are you showing me this? She asked Arnold. He took a breath. Because I was also pressured to file personal expenses as construction costs. The party, some of the furniture, the wine cellar, all of it got folded into the financing. Did you go along with it? I logged it, but I kept the original instructions. I was scared of losing my job. Claire asked for copies. Arnold sent everything. The blue folder hadn't just been holding a power of attorney. It had been holding a plan to turn Claire's silence into consent. Helen called again. The bank had confirmed receipt. Legal had blocked the lien filing. They'd also requested a preventive suspension of any releases not yet finalized. What does that mean? That the final balance won't go out until the audit's done. Claire looked over at Mark, arguing nervously with Robert. Diane was trying to keep the guests away from that corner of the room. The music kept playing, the trays kept circulating, the house still glowed like nothing could touch it. Helen asked, Do you confirm you want to keep the suspension in place? Claire thought about the workers. She asked that any amounts tied to services actually performed and documented be protected. She didn't want employees paying the price for what Diane and Mark had done, but any release tied to her condo needed to stop. I'll log it exactly that way. Claire confirmed through biometric verification. A few minutes later, every phone in Mark's pocket started buzzing at once. First, an alert from the bank. Then one from the interior design vendor, then the pool contractor. The final transfer had been suspended. Diane snatched the phone from her son's hands. Tell them it's a mistake. Mark read the message in silence. In the middle of the room, one of the vendors asked when he'd be paid. Another checked his banking app. The rumors started spreading between tables. Claire stood near the door, still wearing the beige apron Diane had handed her at the start of the night. She slowly took it off and laid it over the blue folder, now abandoned on a chair. That folder had been hidden to steal her signature. The apron had been put on her to remind her of the role Diane believed she should occupy. Now the two objects sat together in plain view of everyone. Mark approached, his face falling apart. The bank froze the release. Claire answered no. The bank froze an operation that never had my authorization to begin with. Behind him, Diane looked at the freshly renovated house as if the walls themselves might vanish. The party hadn't ended yet, but the lie financing every light, every piece of furniture, every toast, had just lost the only name that could ever make it valid. The bank suspended the payments because the collateral submitted under Mrs. Whitfield's name cannot be considered valid. Robert Sanders's voice carried across the room before Diane could pull him away from the guests. The band had stopped. The waitstaff stood frozen near the tables, still holding full trays. Near the pool, 2 vendors compared notifications on their phones. The house stayed lit, but the celebration could no longer hide how fragile its foundation really was. Diane walked over to the manager with a stiff smile. "Robert, there's no need to discuss bank matters in front of everyone. Let's step into the office." Mrs. Whitfield requested that any procedure connected to her property be formally clarified, he replied. Since the confirmation was scheduled for tonight and several beneficiaries of the transaction are present, we need to document the reason for the suspension. Mark tried to jump in. "This is a family misunderstanding. My wife is still reviewing the documents." Claire answered from across the room. "I've reviewed enough to know my signature was used on a form I never signed." The murmuring among the guests grew louder. Diane spun around. "You don't have to do this here." Claire removed the apron and laid it over a chair. The blue folder sat right beneath it, covered by the fabric Diane had used to reduce her to nothing but a helper. She walked to the center of the room, unhurried. "I didn't choose this spot to bring out the document. You two are the ones who scheduled the signing in the middle of a party. Robert asked that the folder be handed over to the bank for review. Diane tried to hold on to it. Those papers belong to the family. The deed to the condo belongs to the company and to the owner listed in the county records," the manager said. "And the bank needs to keep the materials used in the transaction." Paula Reyes had arrived at the house a few minutes earlier after receiving the files Helen had sent over. The 2 attorneys worked at the same firm, and Paula had taken point on site while Helen kept working the phones with the county office. She approached and showed her credentials. "Mrs. Whitfield authorizes copies to be released, not the original personal documents. Everything needs to be logged." Diane looked around, realizing how many people were watching. Cousins, neighbors, business associates, old family friends, all of them had heard her speeches about Mark's success. Now they were watching the same man try to explain why his wife's deed had been hidden in his mother's house. Robert opened the blue folder. The first page was the appraisal on the estate. The updated value still didn't fully cover the loan amount requested. Next came Claire's condo deed, then the limited power of attorney, the added page, and the consent form with the digitized signature. Paula handed over the official certificate from the county. "This is the true instrument." Robert laid the 2 documents side by side. The original had 4 pages. The version sent to the bank had a 5th, containing generic property representation authority. The recorded power of attorney mentioned only insurance building management inspection reports and damage claims. The manager read aloud, "There is no authorization here for a loan, a lien, a mortgage, or a fiduciary transfer of the property." Diane tried to respond. The loan broker said the power of attorney was sufficient. "No broker can expand the authority of a document that's already on record," Robert explained. Mark ran a hand over his face. There was still supposed to be a ratification. That's why Claire was being asked to sign tonight. Paula turned to him. "If ratification was still required, why does the earlier form state she already agreed?" 2 months ago, Mark didn't answer. One of the vendors approached. His name was Steve, and he ran the custom cabinetry business. "Mr. Whitfield, my company was guaranteed payment for tomorrow." "You'll get paid," Mark said. Robert corrected him. "Right now, any amount tied to the second phase is suspended." Another vendor asked if the house was behind on payments. Diane raised her voice. "This house doesn't owe anybody anything. The bank is manufacturing a problem because of Claire's insecurity." The word made Paula close her folder slowly. Insecurity is asking someone to sign without reading. What Mrs. Whitfield did was dispute a signature that was presented under her name. Claire looked at the workers. She recognized several of them from the start of the renovation. Many had worked long hours to get the house finished in time for the party. She didn't want them turned into some kind of moral shield. The completed work needs to be separated from the expenses not yet paid out, she said. Nobody who worked in good faith should go unpaid because of what was done with my documents. Robert nodded. The bank can review payments already consolidated within the released portion. The balance tied to the supplemental guarantee stays frozen. Arnold, the accountant, handed the manager a printed report. Some of these amounts were classified as construction, but they're actually the party, the wine cellar, and personal furniture. Diane stared at him. Who authorized you to hand that over? You and Mark had me log it all under the same cost center. Are you trying to save your own job? I'm trying not to lose my license over a decision I didn't make. Guests started drifting away from the tables. What had been a housewarming party had turned into an accounting meeting. The flowers still looked perfect, but the elegance of the decor could no longer shield Diane from the questions. An old friend approached her. You told me Mark financed this whole renovation with contracts from his company. That's what happened, Diane said. Arnold opened the report. The company didn't have the cash to take on this project. The loan was partially approved using the house and conditionally tied to Mrs. Whitfield's condo. The friend looked at Claire. So this house was also renovated with her money. My property was submitted without my consent, Claire said. That doesn't mean I financed anything voluntarily. Diane tried to regain control. Claire always knew we'd help each other out. She's just using a paperwork slip-up to humiliate me. A slip-up doesn't forge a signature, Paula said. Robert held up the form. Mrs. Whitfield, do you acknowledge signing this document? No. Do you acknowledge authorizing anyone to insert your signature on it? No. Were you informed about the risks of the lien? No. The manager logged each answer on his tablet, then explained the legal department would treat the matter as possible misuse of a document and signature. The broker, Alan Torres, would be asked to produce the original files, the transmission history, and any instructions he'd received. Diane went pale. This can all be resolved if she just signs now. Mark looked at his mother. Stop pushing. It was the first time all night he'd contradicted her. Diane turned slowly. You're going to side against me after everything I've done for you. You're the one who told me to use the power of attorney because your company had no other way out. I sent the file, so own it. Mark looked struck. For months, mother and son had acted as allies. Now, faced with real consequences, Diane was trying to separate her responsibility from his. Claire watched her husband and felt a sadness with no surprise in it. The same cowardice that had let him stay quiet during her humiliation now forced him to choose between the truth and protecting his mother. Robert asked directly, Mr. Whitfield who sent the broker the copy of Mrs. Whitfield's signature? He took a while to answer. You knew she hadn't agreed to any of this yet. I knew we'd need to talk. That's not what I asked. Mark looked at Claire. Yes, I knew. Silence fell over the room. Diane tried to interrupt, but he kept going. I thought she'd accept it once she saw the finished house. I thought she wouldn't let vendors go unpaid. Claire felt her eyes burn, but she didn't cry. You didn't bet on the house going up in value. You bet on my fear of saying no. Mark lowered his head. I was desperate, and I decided my condo would pay for your desperation. Diane walked toward Claire. Sign and save this house. The words came out with no attempt to soften anything anymore. There was no pretending about the goal now. Diane gestured to the restored walls, the chandeliers, the marble staircase. This house has belonged to this family for over 50 years. Your condo is just an investment property. You can buy another one. Claire felt the weight of that blue folder. That condo held her father's last letter, her childhood photographs, and the certainty that she would never have to endure humiliation for lack of somewhere to go. You didn't call me here to build a house, she said. You called on my signature to prop up a lie. I'm a widow. Do you want to throw me out of here? I'm not the one who took on debt beyond this house's capacity. You have money. That doesn't turn my property into an obligation to bail out decisions made behind my back. Diane started crying. The tears were real, but they didn't come from remorse. They came from the fear of losing the social image that defined her whole life. I did everything for my son. Claire looked at Mark. And he did everything to keep looking like the man you wanted to show off. Mark took a breath. My wife didn't pull any collateral. Diane turned on him. Quiet. He kept going. She never authorized the condo to be used. The confession moved through the room like a door slamming shut. The guests, who still had doubts, understood now. Claire wasn't walking away from a promise. The promise had never existed. Robert closed the folder. Without the supplemental collateral, the bank will need to reassess the whole transaction. The portion already released remains tied to the house's contractual conditions. The remaining balance is frozen. Diane asked what would happen if they couldn't offer another property. The bank could require a reduced credit limit, an extraordinary payment, additional collateral, or a restructuring. If no solution was found and there was a default, the measures outlined in the contract would apply. Could they seize the house? A cousin asked. Robert chose his words carefully. There's no immediate seizure, but there is real risk if the debt isn't matched with valid collateral. Diane gripped the back of a chair. Mark asked for time. We have the back lot. That lot is not for sale, his mother snapped. Then what should be used? He asked. Silence again. For the first time, Mark saw clearly what he'd done. To protect his mother's back lot, he had agreed to put his wife's condo at risk. Diane considered her daughter-in-law's property more disposable than any part of her own legacy. Paula proposed an emergency plan. The bank would separate out vendors who'd already completed their work. Mark would provide the real cash flow of his company. Diane would offer the backlot for appraisal. The party expenses and personal items would be pulled from the financing or covered directly by Mark and Diane. Claire agreed to protect the workers on the condition that her condo be removed entirely from the deal. I will not sign a ratification lien or any document connecting my property to this debt, not even to save the marriage, Diane asked. Claire answered, a marriage that depends on a signature obtained through pressure was never being saved in the first place. Mark closed his eyes. The band started packing up their instruments. They'd already been paid within the original budget, but nobody felt like finishing the set. Guests began saying their goodbyes. Some hugged Diane out of politeness. Others left without looking at her at all. Miss Lucy was clearing cups when Claire approached. Want me to put this away? She asked, holding up the apron. Claire picked up the fabric and folded it over the blue folder. No, leave it here. The object used to place her beneath everyone now covered the very document that proved why her presence had been so necessary in the first place. Without Claire, Diane had no collateral. Without her signature, Mark had no image of success to sell to his guests. When the last vendor left the hall, Robert handed Paula a formal suspension notice. The blue folder would be sealed in certified copies. The original deed would go back to Claire. Diane stood in the center of the house, surrounded by furniture still not fully paid for. You got what you wanted, she said to her daughter-in-law. Claire answered, I wanted to sit next to my husband and celebrate a renovation I helped design. You two decided my only role was to serve coffee and sign for a debt. Mark tried to step closer. Claire, I'll fix this. You can fix the debt. What you did to my trust doesn't depend on any bank. She took off her wedding ring but didn't throw it. She dropped it into her purse, picked up the deed, and walked to the door. That night, Diane had entered the room as the undisputed owner of a house restored by her son. Claire had been received as help, no name on the plaque, no seat at the table. Hours later, the woman in the apron walked out, carrying the only property the bank could never touch. Diane was left standing in a luxurious house, a suspended debt, and guests who finally knew where the money Mark took credit for had really come from. The blue folder still sat on the chair. For the first time, it wasn't hiding the truth. It was displaying it for everyone to see. Claire had saved her father's condo, but she understood now that no document could save a marriage built on a signature taken without love. The morning after the party, the house felt like a different place. The flowers had started to wilt. A few glasses still sat on tables here and there. The silence made every newly installed piece of furniture feel heavier somehow. Diane walked through the rooms as if she expected the decor to hand her back some sense of security. She was still wearing the same clothes from the night before. She hadn't slept. Mark had stayed in the office until sunrise, going through contracts, messages, invoices. The cabinetry company wanted a new timeline. The pool contractor threatened to pull the warranty. The wine cellar installer said they'd repossess the equipment if it wasn't paid for. For the first time, he couldn't just call Claire and ask her to fix it. She was at the Riverside Green condo with Helen and Paula. The original deed was back in her hands. On the table sat copies of the power of attorney, the fake consent form, the bank filing, and the ring she'd taken off at the party. Claire didn't feel victorious. She felt tired. For years, she had believed that loving Mark meant helping him through his rough patches. She'd covered expenses, referred clients his way, and worked for free on part of his mother's renovation. She never imagined her generosity would be treated as permanent availability. Helen explained the bank had opened a formal audit. Alan Torres, the broker, would be required to turn over his computer's files and communication records. The institution would also investigate why a digitized signature had been accepted at an early stage without direct confirmation from the owner. "Your condo is protected," the attorney said. "There's no valid recorded lien." Claire took a breath and asked about the workers. The bank had agreed to separate out services that had genuinely been completed. Mark and Diane would need to present a plan for the rest. That concern for the vendors said a lot about who Claire was. Even after being betrayed, she didn't want carpenters, electricians, cooks, or staff to pay the price for someone else's lie. But she also wasn't going to bail everyone out using the property her father left her. 3 days later, the bank called a meeting. Diane showed up with Mark and an attorney of her own. Claire attended only because her name still appeared on the disputed documents. She didn't sit next to her husband. Robert presented the preliminary findings. The house could remain as primary collateral, but the loan amount would need to be reduced. To avoid early default, Diane would have to offer another form of security or make a significant payment. The back lot was the obvious option. Diane refused right away. That lot has been in this family for decades. Claire looked at her. "So has my condo in my family." Diane looked away. Mark suggested selling the lot and using part of the proceeds to reduce the debt. Diane accused her son of letting his wife destroy the Whitfield legacy. "Claire didn't destroy anything," he answered. "We're the ones who took on debt counting on a property that was never ours to use." The admission didn't undo the damage, but it was the first time Mark told the truth without expecting anything in return. Diane started crying. "I did all of this to leave you a beautiful house. You did it to show everyone I was successful, and that's wrong. It's wrong when it means using my wife's signature to hold up an image." Diane's attorney tried to interrupt, but she'd already lost her composure. "Claire has always had more than we did. One more condo wouldn't have made a difference to her." That sentence erased any chance of framing what she'd done as an innocent act of desperation. For Diane, her daughter-in-law's property was disposable because it wasn't part of the story she valued. Claire replied, "You never understood what that condo meant. That's exactly why it was so easy to gamble it away." The bank set a timeline. The back lot would be appraised and put up for sale. Mark would have to submit his company's actual cash flow. Personal expenses, the party, the wine cellar, part of the furniture would be removed from the construction loan and covered directly by him and Diane. Vendors would be paid according to a new schedule. The house wouldn't be seized right away, but it stopped being a fantasy with no real cost attached. Over the following months, Diane had to accept changes she once thought unthinkable. The back lot sold. Some of the imported furniture went back. The wine cellar was removed. The landscaping service was scaled down. The house stayed beautiful, but it finally reflected its owner's actual finances. The friends who'd been at the party found out what had happened. Some drifted away. Others asked around. Diane tried to say Claire had blown things out of proportion, but Mark's public admission and the bank's report closed the door on any new version of events. Claire's name stopped being the ungrateful wife. It became the owner whose signature had been used without her consent. Mark faced professional consequences too. The company suspended his authority to move credit without a second signature. Arnold started reporting directly to an outside accounting firm. During the investigation, Mark stepped back from financial management and focused only on overseeing construction. He sold his more expensive car and used the money to cover part of the personal expenses folded into the loan. He also signed an agreement to reimburse the legal and banking costs caused by the misuse of the documents. None of it was easy, but Claire refused to take part in rebuilding him. Mark texted her almost every day. At first, it was about the debt, the vendors, his mother's situation. Then he started bringing up the marriage. He asked to talk. They met at a coffee shop near Helen's office. Claire picked somewhere public and simple. She didn't want to go back to the house, and she didn't want him at the condo either. Mark looked older. "I was going to tell you once everything was resolved. You didn't want to resolve it before telling me. You wanted to make it impossible for me to say no." He nodded. "I was scared of losing the company, and I let myself put your home at risk. I thought the renovation would bring in contracts. You thought a lot of things. None of them gave you the right to decide for me." He said he'd started therapy, that he was realizing how much his need for his mother's approval had shaped his choices. Since childhood, Diane had held him up as the one who would restore the family name. When the company hit hard times, he felt ashamed to admit he couldn't afford the renovation he'd promised. "My mother said you wouldn't understand. You knew I would understand. What you also knew was that I might refuse." He looked down. Yes. The honesty came late, but Claire recognized it. Mark asked for forgiveness. He didn't demand she come back right away. He said he'd accept a separation and try to rebuild trust for as long as it took. Claire held her cup without drinking. "I might forgive you one day, but I can't go back to putting my life in the hands of someone who treated my consent like an obstacle." "There's no chance of that. There's a chance you could become a better man. That doesn't mean I have to come back and watch it happen." Mark cried quietly. She felt like crying too. There were still good memories, trips, late-night conversations, plans that had once felt real. Ending things didn't erase the love that had existed. It just acknowledged that love no longer offered any safety. The separation became a divorce a few months later. The assets acquired during the marriage were divided fairly. Claire didn't go after Mark's company or his personal belongings. The condo stayed entirely hers, exactly as it had always been on record. Mark didn't contest it. At the final hearing, he confirmed that Claire had never authorized the lien. He also took responsibility for sending the digitized signature to the broker. "My wife didn't destroy the renovation," he stated. "She stopped me from turning my mistake into her debt." The sentence didn't save the marriage, but it closed out the lie. Diane didn't attend the hearing. She never offered a full apology. She sent a letter saying she regretted that a property matter had divided the family. Claire didn't respond. Her former mother-in-law still believed everything had ended because of a condo. She never understood that the condo had only exposed something much bigger about the Whitfields. Claire's voice had only ever mattered to them when it said yes. A year later, the bank's audit closed. Alan Torres lost his broker's license and was held responsible for inserting the false page. The bank acknowledged internal failures and officially confirmed the condo had never been part of any valid lien. The vendors were paid according to the restructured plan. Arnold kept his job and became responsible for blocking any entry made without proper documentation. Mark kept paying down the debt. His company shrank, but it didn't close. He started taking on only jobs his actual cash flow could support. The house stayed with Diane, minus part of the lot, minus the illusion of unlimited wealth. Claire kept working. She decided to renovate the Riverside Green condo, not to sell it, but to move back in. She turned the room that had been used to store documents into a small home office and built a reading nook by the window where her father used to drink his coffee. While clearing things out, she found the blue folder. Paula had returned it once the audit closed. Inside were the real power of attorney, the deed, the certificate confirming no valid lien existed, and the copies used during the investigation. Claire pulled out the falsified documents and set them aside for the legal file. She'd keep only what was legitimate in the condo. At the bottom of the folder was another folded page. She recognized her father's handwriting before she even opened it. The letter had been tucked in with the deed years earlier. She'd probably never noticed it, since Mark had handled the paperwork after the flooding incident. The note was short. "Sweetheart, this home should never tie you down to anyone. It should guarantee that you never have to accept humiliation for lack of somewhere to go. Claire covered her mouth with her hand. She finally cried. Not over the bank, or the party, or the marriage that had ended. She cried because she finally understood the real meaning of her inheritance. Her father hadn't just left her walls and a parcel number and a market value. He'd left her a way out, a safe place, the freedom to say no whenever someone tried to turn love into an obligation. That was why she'd stood firm. Not out of selfishness, not out of revenge, but because losing that condo would have meant losing the last protection built by someone who had always respected her choices. Claire put the letter in a simple frame and set it on the reading table. The blue folder went into a small safe. This time, only she had the code. A few months later, Mark asked to visit the condo. He wanted to return a book that had belonged to her father, one that had ended up among his things. Claire allowed it. He walked through the renovated space, saw the framed letter. "I didn't know," he said. "You knew it mattered to me. You just didn't know why. You didn't need to know all the reasons to respect my no." Mark nodded. Before leaving, he handed over the book and mentioned he'd paid off another chunk of the debt. Diane had started selling off some antiques to cut expenses. He didn't ask for reconciliation. "I'm learning how to handle my own life without using yours as collateral," he said. Claire sensed real regret in him. Still, her decision hadn't changed. "I hope you keep learning." He thanked her and left. Claire closed the door without any anger in her. On the night of the party, Diane had put an apron in her hands and sent her out to serve coffee. Mark had stayed quiet while guests treated her like she didn't matter. The blue folder had been hidden under flowers because everyone assumed her signature could be used without her voice ever being heard. A year later, Claire sat by the window of her own condo. The deed was secure. The house's debt no longer carried her name. The marriage had ended, but her dignity remained whole. She hadn't saved Diane from the choices her mother-in-law had made. She also hadn't thrown her out on the street. She hadn't destroyed Mark's company. She had simply handed every responsibility back to the person it actually belonged to. The folder once used to hide a fraud now held the letter that revealed the greatest truth of the whole story. Claire could share love, knowledge, money, and care, but she would never again hand anyone the right to decide for her.